The first sound was not a siren, nor a broadcast, but the unmistakable wet slap of a body hitting the pavement. It was a noise you feel in your teeth, a percussive shock that tore me from the heavy, suffocating sleep of a late summer night. My eyes snapped open, and for a moment, I was disoriented, staring at the familiar cracks in my ceiling. But the sound was real. It came from outside my apartment on the first floor. A small, rattling tremor, as if someone had dropped a sack of cement from a great height. I slid out of bed, the old floorboards groaning under my bare feet, and crept to the front window. Newfield was a town of quiet lawns and even quieter lives, so any disturbance after midnight was an event. I pulled back a corner of the blind, careful to keep my face out of sight. The street was bathed in the pale, sickly glow of a few remaining streetlights, their yellow bulbs flickering as if struggling to stay alive. The air was thick, heavy with the scent of ozone and something else, something sweet and cloying, like burnt sugar. And there, in the middle of my front lawn, was the source of the noise. It was my neighbor, old Mr. Henderson, the retired mailman who lived in the unit directly above mine. His body lay in a grotesque, twisted sprawl on the grass. His head was turned at an impossible angle, one arm flung out as if trying to grab onto the empty air. He didn't move. He wasn't breathing. He looked like a discarded marionette. I felt the blood drain from my face. This wasn't an accident. No one falls from a second-story balcony and lands that still. I was about to rush out, about to call for help, when I saw it. A figure emerged from shadows of the building's side, moving with a stilted, mechanical precision that was utterly unnatural. It was tall and unnervingly thin. Its movements were too smooth, its joints too fluid. It was a person, I was sure of it, but it walked as if its skeleton had been replaced with hydraulics. Its arms, disproportionately long, hung loosely at its sides, swaying with an eerie, pendulum-like motion. It was wearing a long, dark coat, but its face was a blur. The streetlight couldn't seem to focus on it. It was as if its features were a glitch, a shimmering distortion in the air. The figure stopped next to Mr. Henderson's body. It didn't bend down. It didn't react. It simply stood there for a long moment, and then a low, rhythmic hum began to rise from it. A deep, resonant tone that vibrated through the glass of my window pane and into my chest. The hum wasn't a sound. It was an absence of sound, a vacuum of noise that stole all other ambient sounds. The chirp of crickets, the distant drone of a car. It consumed everything. And as the hum grew, the figure began to glow faintly, a soft, pulsating violet light that pulsed with each beat of the hum. Then, with same unsettling, robotic grace, it reached down and, without a single sound, wrapped its long, skeletal fingers around Mr. Henderson's lifeless arm. It began to pull, slowly dragging the body into the dense shadows behind the building. I recoiled from window, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. I grabbed my phone off the night. My hands were shaking so violently that I almost dropped it. I couldn't call 911. My fingers fumbled, and instead of dialing, I saw a text from my friend Leo. "You see that? That's insane." My breath hitched. He had seen it too. Leo lived 2 buildings down, a freelance graphic designer who worked mostly from home. He was the one who convinced me to move out to Newfield, promising me it was a place where nothing ever happens. Ironic. I quickly typed a reply. "What did you see?" I knew what he saw, but I needed confirmation. I needed someone else to tell me I hadn't imagined it. His response came back immediately. "A tall thing. Took Henderson. I tried to film it, but my phone glitched out." Glitch. It was the perfect word for what I had just witnessed. Another text from him. "The air is weird, like static. I'm getting a headache." I glanced back at the window. The hum was gone. The street was silent once more, save for the hum of the tired streetlights. I stepped into the hallway, trying to shake the cold dread that was settling in my stomach. The door to my apartment felt flimsy, paper thin. I locked it, then locked it again. My hands found the deadbolt, and I pushed it into place, a meager barrier against the things that walked in the dark. I heard a sudden, sharp rap on my door. I froze, my body rigid, my eyes wide. My breath caught in my throat. Another rap, louder this time, and then a voice, strained and low. "Alex, open up. It's me." He stumbled in, his face pale and slick with sweat. He was holding his phone, the screen still flickering with a scrambled, corrupted video file. "You saw it," he gasped, his eyes darting around my apartment as if expecting the thing to be right behind him. You saw it drag him off? Yeah, I saw it. He sank onto my couch, running a hand through his hair. I don't get it. What the hell was that? And where's the police? Where's the fire department? I called, but it just rang busy. I think my phone glitched too, I lied, not wanting to admit my own fear. I didn't try to call. I didn't want to bring any more attention to myself. I crossed the room and peered through the blinds again. The street was still empty, but my mind replayed the image of that thing dragging Mr. Henderson's body away. It wasn't a human. It wasn't an animal. It was an object, a machine, and it was collecting people. We need to call someone, Leo insisted. Who? I asked, turning to him. The phones are down. The police aren't answering. It's like the town just went dark. A strange, unnatural stillness had settled over Newfield. The usual sounds of a sleeping town, the rumble of a distant truck on the highway, the creak of an old house settling were gone, replaced by a dead, hollow silence. It was a void where sound used to be. The humming creature had stolen it. I pulled out my laptop, but the Wi-Fi icon showed no connection, not even a network. It was just gone. No internet, no phone lines. Newfield was a ghost town, and we were its last residents. We had turned off all the lights and covered the windows with blankets. We didn't dare speak above a whisper. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the wind outside made us jump. The hours dragged like years. Every creak of the floor above made us flinch. At one point, Leo whispered, "We should leave now before they come back," his voice shaking with desperation. "Leave?" I hissed. "Where would we go? The streets are theirs." Silence stretched between us, broken only by my own shallow breathing. Outside, something scraped against the building, slow, deliberate, circling. I froze, listening. A faint tap came next, like fingertips brushing glass. My stomach lurched as I realized it was the window. I forced myself to peek through a crack in the blanket. Nothing. Just the wavering streetlight. But when I blinked for the briefest instant, I thought I saw my mother's face staring back at me from the glass, her lips moving in a silent plea. My chest clenched, and I stumbled back. It was the hum. It was in my head, bending familiar shapes into something grotesque. Leo noticed the look on my face, but said nothing. He didn't need to. The fear was mutual, and it was already eating us alive. Around 3 a.m., we heard it. A new sound. The rustling of fabric, the soft, methodical drag of something heavy across the gravel walkway outside. It was a different sound from the first time, not a loud, percussive thud, but a slow, deliberate scrape, like a rake being dragged across concrete. I crept to the window and pulled back a corner of the blanket. They were all shaped like humans, but their movements were a mockery of a walk. They were bent at odd angles, their backs bowed, their heads tilted to the side. They were all wearing the same long, dark coats, and their faces were the same shimmering, unfocused blur. They moved in a slow, synchronized procession, their arms swinging in that same terrifying pendulum motion. Their procession was deliberate, almost ceremonial. The way they moved together, jerking in slow synchrony, made my stomach knot. It wasn't just dragging a body, it was as though they were carrying an offering. One of them stopped, tilting its head upward at an impossible angle, as if listening to something far above the town. Another crouched, long fingers etching strange, precise marks into the dirt. They weren't random scratches. They looked deliberate, circles and intersecting lines like diagrams carved into the earth. The humming swelled again, and I thought for a moment it was coming from inside my apartment. My heart seized. I pressed my back to the wall, holding my breath, staring at the door, half expecting it to burst inward. But the sound was still outside, vibrating the air, rattling picture frames on my walls. I couldn't tear my eyes away. As they glowed, faint halos pulsing under their coats, I thought of Henderson's limp body. I thought of his bones being unscrewed, taken apart, reassembled into something else. My mind filled in the blanks of horrors I hadn't seen, and I wished I hadn't. And they were dragging something behind them. A body. Limp, lifeless, its arms and legs bouncing with each scrape. The three figures stopped directly in front of my unit. They didn't look at the door or the windows. They simply stopped, and the humming began again. A low, soft thrum that made my teeth ache. This time was different. It didn't just absorb the sound. It seemed to be generating a new one. A faint, ethereal, high-pitched whine that seemed to be communicating with something in the air itself. The figures began to glow again, but this time the light was a sickly green. It pulsed, brighter and brighter, and then the world outside went black. The streetlights all died at the exact same moment. The hum stopped. Then there was a loud, sharp thud on my front door. It wasn't a knock. It was a thud. It came from the direction of the front porch, but there was no sound of a footstep, no sign of anything moving, just the thud. Leo and I looked at each other, our eyes wide with fear. We could hear the sound of the creatures shuffling outside, their rhythmic dragging getting closer. The thud on the door repeated, each time a little louder, a little more insistent. I backed away from the window and I grabbed an old baseball bat from my closet. Leo picked up a heavy decorative vase from my coffee table. It felt pathetic, a piece of stoneware against whatever that was. And then, just as the next thud was about to hit, the front window shattered with a deafening crash. A dark shape was silhouetted in the broken glass, its long, bladed arm reaching inside. It was one of them. I could see the glow of its skin through the gaps in its dark clothing. Its movements were so fast, so fluid, that it was impossible to track its form. We scattered. I stumbled back toward my bedroom, pulling the door shut and locking it. Leo ran toward the kitchen. I could hear the shattering of plates and the low, guttural shriek that had a mechanical quality to it. I frantically searched my room, my mind racing. The fire escape. The building was old. There had to be one. I found it. A small window at the back of the room that led to a rusted iron staircase. It was my only way out. I unlatched the lock and pushed the window open. The air outside was cool and damp. I could hear the sounds from inside the apartment, the crash of furniture, a single sharp yelp that was cut short, and then silence. Just the sickening, methodical thud of feet hitting the floor. I climbed out the window, my bare feet landing on the cold metal grating of the fire escape. I could feel the rust flaking off onto my skin. I didn't look back. I just descended, step by slow, deliberate step, down into the inky darkness of the alley below. The alley was a maze of overflowing dumpsters and forgotten junk, but it was my only sanctuary. I kept to the shadows, my heart pounding in my ears. I could hear the sounds of movement around me, not just the rhythmic shuffle of the creatures, but something else, a different kind of sound, something human, a faint, broken sob. I saw a glint of light from a neighboring apartment building. A flashlight held by a shaky hand flickered on and off in a rapid Morse code-like signal. A frantic plea for help. I ignored it. My focus was on getting out of this alley. I didn't know what was happening, but I knew I couldn't stay here. I had to find a way to warn people, to tell them what was happening, to tell them that there wasn't a biohazard. There was something else, something far more terrifying, something that was hunting. I took a deep breath, and as I turned to make my escape, I saw it. The same tall, impossibly thin figure. It stood at the end of the alley, its head tilted, a distorted, shimmering blur for a face. It was just standing there, waiting, not hunting, not stalking, just watching, as if it had known where I was going to be the entire time. I ran. I didn't care about being quiet. I didn't care about the sound. My lungs screamed for air, and my legs burned with every step. I didn't look back. I just ran. I made it to the end of the alley and into the street, and as I did, I saw more of them. They were everywhere, at the end of every block, on every corner, standing motionless, watching. They weren't just collecting people. They were corralling them. They were herding us into a small, contained zone. We weren't survivors. We were specimens. And the whole town of Newfield was their laboratory. My body screamed for me to stop, to hide, to give up. But I saw something that gave me a flicker of hope. A car. An old, beat-up pickup truck parked on the side of the road. It looked abandoned, but the keys might still be in it. I ran toward it, my heart pounding, the chilling, methodical hum starting to rise in the air again. It was a familiar sound now, the sound of their approach. But it wasn't. The pickup truck was a monument to a forgotten world. Rust had consumed most of its paint, but the engine still roared to life with a satisfying cough and rumble. I fumbled with the key in the ignition, my hands numb with cold and adrenaline. The dome light flickered on, illuminating the cab. The key was already in the ignition. It felt like a gift, or a trap. I didn't waste time questioning it. I slammed the door shut and floored the gas. The tires spun on the gravel, then found purchase, and the truck lurched forward. My mind was a mess of disconnected thoughts. The sight of Mr. Henderson's body, Leo's terrified yelp, the tall, distorted figures at the end of the alley. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. I had to get out. That was the only thought that mattered. I tore down the street, my headlights cutting through the oppressive darkness. I saw them in the periphery, dozens of them, standing on lawns and sidewalks. They didn't move. They just watched. Their faces were still a shimmering, unfocused blur, but I could make out the faint, violet glow of their skin through the holes in their tattered coats. They were waiting. But what for? A sudden, sharp thud echoed from the truck's bed. I hit the brakes, my heart leaping into my throat. The sound repeated, followed by a frantic scratching. A voice, muffled and panicked, yelled my name. "Alex, let me in, man, please!" It was Leo. He was clinging to the back of the truck, his face a wild mask of terror. I hadn't seen him get in. I thought he was gone. I pulled over and scrambled to the passenger side, flinging the door open or shut. "Where were you?" I gasped, my voice shaking. "The back window," he said, breathing hard. "The back window. I climbed out. I thought I was dead, man. I swear I thought they had me." He was shaking uncontrollably, his eyes wide and bloodshot. "I saw them. They were everywhere. I hid under a car, and then when you came by, I just ran and jumped." I didn't have time to ask how he survived the creature in my apartment. I just nodded, put the truck in drive, and peeled out again. The humming began to rise in the air again, but we were moving too fast for it to catch us. The eerie, sickly green glow of the figures pulsed in my rearview mirror as we sped away from my neighborhood. We were almost out of town when the air changed. The strange, sweet scent of burnt sugar returned, thick and cloying. The lights from the dashboard began to flicker, the engine sputtering. "No, no, no," I muttered, my foot still pressed to the floor. Up ahead, a wall of pure blackness had risen, a perfect, impenetrable curtain across the road. It wasn't fog. It was a complete absence of light, a void that swallowed the beam of my headlights. "What is that?" Leo whispered, his voice trembling. I didn't answer. I just slammed on the brakes. The truck skidded to a halt just inches from the edge of the darkness. The engine died. The air around us became heavy and still. The sweet smell was overwhelming, making my eyes water. Then I heard a new sound, one that chilled me more than the hum, a rhythmic, mechanical sound like a broken clock. And from the darkness, a single piercing red light flickered on. It wasn't a car light. It was a single crimson orb floating in the void. 100 more joined it, then 1,000, a swarm of perfect red circles that floated in the blackness like a school of deep-sea predators. The clicking grew louder, faster. The perfect orbs began to move, to flow, to twist into a single cohesive shape. They were forming something, a silhouette huge and immense, blocking out the sky. "It's a wall," Leo said, his voice a ghost of a whisper. "The whole town is a wall." I fumbled for the walkie-talkie Hank had given us. I need to get to the lot, I mumbled. "Channel 3, you get to the lot, you call me." I reached for it, and then I saw it, or rather felt it. The steering wheel, the dashboard, the seats, they all began to hum with that same resonant, sickening tone. A faint violet light started to pulse from the engine, from the dashboard, from the seats. It was everywhere. The truck was being consumed. We were inside of it. "We have to get out," I screamed, fumbling for the door handle. Leo was already fumbling with his own. He was panicking. We got the doors open and bailed out, hitting the hard pavement with a thud. We scrambled to our feet and ran, abandoning the truck to the violet glow that was now consuming it. We ran into the fields lining the road, tearing through the tall, dry grass. The town's containment wasn't a wall of soldiers or roadblocks. It was an organic, living thing, a field of energy. I felt the static building in the air, the hair on my arms and neck standing on end. I looked back and saw the truck. The violet light had turned it into a glowing skeleton. Every piece of metal, every bit of circuitry was glowing with a supernatural light. The hum intensified, reaching a fever pitch, and then the truck exploded into a shower of violet sparks and twisting metal. We were on our own now. We ran for hours, our lungs burning, our legs screaming for rest. We kept our heads down and stayed in the long grass, away from the roads. We heard the clicking and the humming in the distance, but it seemed to be coming from the main roads. It was a perimeter, and we were inside it. As the sun began to rise, a sickly orange glow bled into the sky. It wasn't the warm, life-giving light of a new day. It was the color of a bruise. The sky was the same color as the haze that had settled over the town. We collapsed in the middle of a large field, exhausted. Leo's face was covered in a mix of dirt and sweat, his eyes still wide with shock. He just stared at the sky. "What was that?" he finally whispered. "I don't know," I said, my voice hoarse. "But it's not a virus. It's not a biohazard. This is something else. Something intelligent." The creatures from the night before, the ones with the blurred faces and the mechanical movements, they weren't sick. They were being controlled. And the perimeter, it wasn't a quarantine. It was a fence. We spent the day hiding. We found a small abandoned hunting shack on the edge of the woods and holed up inside. The place was old and smelled of damp wood and mice. Or at least it felt safe. We had no food, no water, and no way to contact anyone. Our phones were useless. My laptop was useless. The walkie-talkie was dead. "We need to get to town," Leo said, his voice flat. "We have to get supplies." I shook my head. "No, not the town. We'll be killed." "Then what? We starve out here? At least in town we'll have a chance. We know where the grocery store is. We can get food, water, a weapon." I considered his words. He was right. We couldn't survive out here for long. And the creatures, as terrifying as they were, seemed to be moving with a purpose. A hunting party. If we stayed in one place, they would eventually find us. We had to move. We had to be proactive. "Okay," I said, my voice low and determined. "We go tonight. We move fast. We get in, we get what we need, and we get out." As night fell, a new silence settled over Newfield. The silence wasn't empty. It was filled with a low, almost imperceptible static, like the world was holding its breath. We moved out from the shack and made our way toward the town's main street. We stayed in the shadows, clinging to the sides of buildings, our eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of movement. That's when we heard it. A faint, childlike sound. A little girl singing a nursery rhyme. "Twinkle, twinkle, little star." The sound was coming from the center of town, from the courthouse. I recognized it. It was the same courthouse from the original script, a central location for the town. But this time it was a sound that was luring us in, not a place to escape to. "We have to go," Leo whispered, his eyes wide. "There's a kid in there." "It's a trap," I said, my voice sharp. "Don't you hear it? The creatures, they hum. They make unnatural noises. That girl is one of them." "We can't be sure," he argued, his voice full of hope. "What if she's a survivor? What if she's alone?" I knew the answer. The creatures weren't mindless. They were using our humanity against us. They were luring us in with a familiar song, a sign of innocence. It was a classic hunter's trick. But the hope in Leo's eyes was too powerful to ignore. He was a good person. He wouldn't leave a child behind. "Okay," I said, giving in. "But we go in quietly. We don't make a sound. And if we see one of them, we run. No questions asked." We crept closer to the courthouse, moving from dumpster to dumpster, our bodies tense with fear. The nursery rhyme grew louder, and there's the voice perfectly innocent. "How I wonder what you are." We reached the back entrance of the courthouse, a metal door with a small rectangular window. I peered inside. It was dark, no lights, but I could hear the singing coming from the floor above. "Let's go," Leo said, his hand already on the doorknob. I stopped him. "Wait, look." On the ground in front of the door was a single child's shoe, a small red sneaker, perfectly placed, a breadcrumb trail leading to the mouth of the monster. "It's a trap," I said, my voice firm. "We're not going in there, we're going to the grocery store, it's 2 blocks over." But Leo wasn't listening. He pushed past me and yanked the door open. He was a man of action. He believed in doing the right thing. He was a hero in a world that didn't have them anymore. "I'm not leaving a kid behind, Alex," he said, his voice resolute. "Even if it's a trap, I have to try." I watched him disappear into the darkness of the courthouse, his flashlight beam a frantic dancing light. I wanted to scream at him. I wanted to run after him. But I knew it was a lost cause. He was gone. I turned and ran the other way toward the grocery store. I had to get supplies. I had to survive. I had to get out of this town. I owed it to Leo. I owed it to everyone who had fallen. I had to live. As I rounded the corner, I heard the singing stop. It was replaced by a low, guttural shriek that was both human and mechanical, a symphony of suffering. I didn't need to look back to know what had happened. I had lost him. The creatures had won. I felt a cold, empty void in my stomach, a profound sense of loss that was more painful than any physical wound. The world was a darker place without Leo's hope, and I was now alone. I reached the grocery store, a small, local market. I tried the door. It was unlocked. The power was out, but the faint moonlight coming through the windows was enough to see. The place had been picked clean. Empty shelves, torn boxes, and garbage were everywhere. Someone had been here. They had left nothing. My heart sank. My last hope was gone. I turned to leave, but as I did, I saw a figure in the back of the store, crouched over something. A man, dressed in a filthy maintenance uniform. He had a flashlight in his hand, its beam illuminating a series of old crates. He wasn't a creature. His posture was too human. I held my breath, my hand going to the rusty hatchet I had tucked into my waistband. I crept closer, my movements slow and deliberate. "Hello?" I whispered. The man jumped, his flashlight beam swinging wildly, catching me in the face. His eyes were wide with fear, but they were human, alive. "Who are you?" he said, his voice a panicked whisper. "My name is Alex. I'm a survivor. I thought I was the only one left." He spoke fast, words tumbling over one another like a man who hadn't used his voice in days. His hands shook as he led me deeper into the store, and in that trembling I saw more than hunger. I saw memory. "My wife was taken," he said abruptly, the words cutting through the silence like broken glass. "First night, I saw them take her from our porch. She didn't scream. She couldn't. The sound." He stopped himself, his jaw tight. I thought I'd be next, but they ignored me, like I wasn't worth the trouble. His eyes glistened under the dim flashlight, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I saw something worse than fear. Survivor's guilt. When he showed me the basement, I hesitated at the threshold. The air was damp, close, and smelled faintly of mildew and old blood. For a moment, suspicion flared in me. What if this was a trap? What if Davis wasn't human at all? Just another lure wearing human skin? The thought rooted in my brain like a thorn, and even as he handed me a can of beans, I couldn't help imagining his eyes flickering violet in the dark. I ate anyway. Hunger made me reckless. He lowered his flashlight. "I'm Davis. I'm the groundskeeper here. I was just coming up for food." I looked at the empty shelves. "There's nothing left." He shook his head and motioned for me to follow him. He led me to the back of the store, to a hidden door behind a large freezer. He opened it, revealing a staircase leading down into a small, dark basement. "I've been hoarding supplies down here," he said. "The creatures, they don't seem to be interested in food. They're after something else." We went down into the basement. It was a small bunker filled with canned goods, bottled water, batteries, and a small cot. He was a survivor, a true survivor. He gave me a bottle of water and a can of beans. I ate hungrily, the food a welcome comfort in the midst of the chaos. "What is this?" I asked, looking at the blinking lights on a small portable radio. "I've been trying to listen to the news," he said. "The only signal that comes through is a faint, coded broadcast. I haven't been able to make out what they're saying, but it's not a warning. It's a message." He fiddled with the dials, and a low, crackling voice came through the static. It was robotic, inhuman, and completely devoid of emotion. "Directive 1, Phase 2, harvesting complete." The broadcast repeated on a loop. "What does that mean?" I asked, my blood running cold. "I don't know," Davis said, "but I think it means we're in big trouble." He was a man who knew how to live. He was a man who had survived, but his eyes held the same fear as mine. I looked at the radio. "Harvesting complete." I thought of the creatures dragging Mr. Henderson away. I thought of the perfect red orbs. They weren't just collecting people, they were harvesting them. For what? The broadcast continued on a loop, the chilling, inhuman voice echoing in the small basement. "Directive 1, Phase 2, harvesting complete." I knew then that this wasn't an accident. This wasn't a biological outbreak. It was a plan, a calculated, methodical, and completely inhuman plan. And we were right in the middle of it. The words from the radio, "harvesting complete," echoed in the stillness of the basement. I stared at the blinking lights on the receiver, my mind replaying the robotic voice, trying to make sense of the incomprehensible. It was a cold, alien term for something profoundly horrifying. It meant we weren't being hunted, we were being gathered. And the broadcast suggested the gathering was over. We were the leftovers. Davis, the groundskeeper, pulled a canteen from a crate and offered it to me. "We're running low," he said, his voice flat. "This is all I have left." I took a long drink, the water a cool relief in my parched throat. I looked at the man who had saved me. His face was a roadmap of exhaustion, lines of dirt and sweat etched into his skin. He was older, maybe in his late 50s, but his eyes held a steely resolve that spoke of a deep, ingrained survival instinct. "What do you think is going on?" I asked, needing to talk, to process the madness. "The creatures, they're not sick. They're organized. And that wall of light, it's not a quarantine, it's a cage." Davis sat on an overturned crate, wiping the grime from his face with a rag. "I've been watching them, but they're not. They work in pairs, in groups. They use tools. I saw one of them use a piece of rebar to pry open a window. They don't eat. They don't sleep. They just gather." "Gather what?" I asked, a fresh wave of dread washing over me. "People. They're parts." My stomach clenched. I thought of Mr. Henderson, of Leo. My heart pounded against my ribs. "I think they're rebuilding themselves," he continued, his voice barely a whisper. "I don't know what they are or where they came from, but they're using us, our bodies. They're harvesting us to make more of them." The words hit me like a physical blow. The biohazard containment was a lie. The whole thing was a cover-up. Newfield wasn't being purged, it was being used as a staging ground, a factory for a new kind of terror. We spent the rest of the night in silence, the only sound the low static of the radio and the muffled sounds of the creatures moving above us. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Leo's panicked face, his hope, his heroic desperation. It was a debt I could never repay. I was the one who had run. As the sun began its sickly ascent, casting a bruised purple light through the small, grimy window of the basement, Davis finally broke the silence. "We can't stay here," he said. The broadcast said harvesting complete. That means they'll be moving to the next phase. I don't know what that is, but I don't want to be here to find out. He had a point. Staying meant waiting to be found. But leaving meant walking into the mouth of the beast. "We need a plan," I said, "a real one." The perimeter is around the main roads. They're guarding the highway entrances, the county roads, but there's a way out that they might not be watching, the old irrigation tunnels. He pulled out a faded map of Newfield and spread it on the floor. It was a relic from a different time, a time of summer festivals and town picnics. He pointed to a series of dotted lines that ran under the town and out into the surrounding farmlands. They're old, abandoned. They were used to move water from the reservoir to the farmlands. If they're still clear, we could use them to get past the perimeter. It was a long shot, a desperate last resort, but it was all we had. That night, we began our descent into the darkness. We packed our bags with the last of the food and water, a few batteries, and a small, rusted flashlight. We left the radio behind. Its signal was now a constant, terrifying reminder of our impending fate. Davis led the way, his knowledge of the town's forgotten underbelly, our only guide. The thought of crawling into the earth turned my stomach. I had hated basements as a kid, terrified of the dark corners where I swore something was breathing. Now I was willingly stepping into a hole that could bury us alive. The tunnels pressed in like a coffin. Every drop of water echoing off stone sounded like a footstep behind us. At one bend, the flashlight beam caught something embedded in the wall. I froze. A ribcage. Not clean, not buried, but fused into the stone as though the rock itself had grown around it. A half-formed— "Keep moving," Davis whispered, though his own voice cracked. The deeper we went, the worse it got. Stray wires ran along the ceiling, pulsing faintly, like veins beneath sick skin. The hum vibrated through them, subtle at first, then louder. My skin crawled with the sensation of being inside something alive. The tunnel wasn't just a passage, it was part of their body. We entered the tunnels through a small, manhole-sized entrance behind a dilapidated shed. The air was thick with the smell of wet earth and decay. The beam from our flashlight cut through the oppressive blackness, illuminating a narrow, stone-lined passage. The walls were slick with moss and grime, and a thin layer of stagnant water sloshed around our ankles with every step. The tunnel was a world unto itself, a silent, subterranean artery beneath the town. We moved slowly, cautiously, our senses on high alert. The silence was absolute. No birds, no insects, no wind, just the sound of our breathing and the splash of water. We had been walking for what felt like hours when we came to a junction. 3 tunnels branched off from the main one. Davis froze, his body rigid. "What is it?" I whispered. "Footprints," he said, his voice barely audible. "Fresh ones." He shined his flashlight on the ground. A series of large, misshapen footprints were pressed into the mud, leading down the tunnel to the right. They were not human. They were too large, the stride too long. "One of them came down here," Davis said, his voice laced with a fresh panic. "How did it get in? It can't be." He shook his head, a gesture of disbelief and dread. I thought back to the creature's movements, the way they moved like wind-up dolls. It was the same unnatural grace I had seen in the alley. The thing in the tunnel wasn't a survivor. It was one of them. And it was here, in our only escape route. We decided to press on, choosing the tunnel to the left. It was a calculated risk. The footprints led away from us, so we hoped that the creature would not return. We moved with a new urgency, our steps faster, our breaths shorter. The tunnels twisted and turned, and we lost all sense of direction. The air grew colder, and a faint hum began to vibrate in the walls around us. It was a soft, low thrum, like the sound of a distant machine. "You hear that?" I asked, my voice shaky. Davis nodded, his eyes wide. "It's getting closer." The hum intensified, the vibration growing from a low thrum to a constant, high-pitched whine. The air was filled with a sickly, sweet smell, the same odor of ozone and burnt sugar that I had smelled on the night of the harvest. Suddenly, the hum stopped. The silence that followed was even more terrifying than the noise. "Run," Davis said, his voice a strained whisper. We didn't need to be told twice. We ran, slipping and sliding in the mud, our hearts pounding. We ran until our lungs burned, until the air felt like fire in our throats. We came to a section of the tunnel where the ceiling had collapsed, forcing us to crawl on our hands and knees. As we crawled, I saw a light ahead, a faint, flickering glow. Hope surged through me. We were close. We were almost out. But as we got closer, I realized the light was not sunlight. It was a soft, ethereal glow, and it was coming from a small square room at the end of the tunnel. The room was not on the map. It was a secret, hidden place. We crept to the entrance and peered inside. The room was a mess of wires and strange alien machinery. In the center of the room, a large, humming generator pulsed with a faint violet light, and in the corner, crouched over a large metallic box, was one of them. It was one of the creatures, its back to us. It was hunched over, its long, skeletal fingers pulling wires from the box, its head tilted at an impossible angle. It was humming softly to itself, a low, mechanical song that sent a shiver down my spine. And then I saw it, the box. It was open, and inside were dozens of blinking red lights. My blood ran cold. The box was a series of devices, a small, portable power station. The humming wasn't just a sound, it was the creature feeding, recharging its batteries. Davis and I looked at each other, our eyes wide with the same terrible realization. We weren't the ones who were trapped in Newfield. We were the ones who were being hunted, and they weren't going to stop until they found us all. They were recharging. They were waiting. They were preparing for the next phase. I felt a cold dread settle deep in my stomach. The harvest was not over. It was just a pause, and we were about to become a part of the next act. Suddenly, the creature at the generator stopped humming. Its head turned slowly, its blurred face a shimmering, unfocused distortion in the violet light. It stood slowly, its body unfolding with a series of unnerving clicks and pops. It began to walk toward us, its movements a slow, deliberate march. It wasn't running, it wasn't lunging. It was coming for us with a terrifying, methodical purpose. We were not prey. We were a problem to be solved. Davis and I backed away slowly, our hearts hammering in our chests. We had no weapons, no way to fight. We were in a long, narrow tunnel, a perfect bottleneck. There was no escape. The creature picked up its pace, its mechanical walk turning into a strange, loping gait. The humming returned, louder this time, a high-pitched whine that grated on my nerves. It was a song of death, and we were the audience. We turned and ran, not back the way we came, but into the darkness of a side tunnel. It was a dead end. We knew it, but it was better than waiting to die. The creature's footsteps echoed behind us, growing louder, closer. We were running out of time, we were running out of luck, and we were running out of hope. The brick wall at the end of the tunnel was cold and unyielding against my back. Davis and I were trapped, the rhythmic clicking of the creature's approach growing louder with every beat of my heart. The air was thick with the scent of ozone and decay. The air a perfect, contained vacuum of dread. I raised my hatchet, my knuckles white, a desperate final act against a force I couldn't comprehend. The creature emerged from the gloom, its form a shifting, liquid nightmare of blurred edges and distorted lines. It stopped just 10 feet away, and the humming that radiated from it was a living thing, a physical vibration that made my bones ache. It was not a monster, it was a perfectly constructed biomechanical tool. And then it spoke. The sound was not a voice, but a tapestry of fragmented whispers, a digital chorus of 100 recorded memories. Each word was a different pitch, a different texture. You are not a part of the harvest. A wave of confusion washed over me, stronger than the fear. My hand holding the hatchet fell to my side. Davis, too, seemed to deflate, the tension in his body replaced by a profound, empty bewilderment. Your genetic markers do not align with the directive, the creature's chorus continued, each syllable a disembodied echo. Your human structure is flawed, unstable, you are inefficient. The words were an unbearable cruelty. We weren't survivors, we weren't special, we were worthless. My mind reeled, trying to process this new, more profound layer of horror. The creature wasn't a predator, it was a discriminating collector, a sentient machine that had deemed us unworthy of assimilation. Our survival was not a victory, it was an insult. As if to prove its cold final point, the creature's arm, a long bladed appendage, gestured to a section of the brick wall to my left. There is a path for you. I looked at the solid brick, but Davis, his eyes still wide with shock, ran a hand along it. His fingers found a seam, a faint line of mortar that ran along a perfect square. It's a secret passage, he gasped, his voice a disbelieving, "Go to the forest." Davis and I looked at each other, the same terrifying realization dawning on both of us. The thing had known we were here. It had been toying with us, leading us to this final chilling conversation. It wasn't about a physical fight, it was about a test. We had been given a choice, wait to be disposed of, or flee and become witnesses. We didn't hesitate. We pushed on the seam, and a section of the wall slid back with a low groan, revealing a small, dark crawl space. I scrambled in first, my body scraped and bruised on the rough stone. Davis followed close behind. I didn't look back. The creature's silhouette stood motionless in the tunnel behind us, its humming a low, resonating thrum that followed us into the darkness. We crawled for what felt like an eternity, the crawl space a suffocating tomb of wet earth and stale air. The passage was narrow, the low ceiling pressing on my back, the rough stone scraping against my knees and elbows. Every sound was magnified, the rasp of my pants on the rock, the labored breathing of Davis behind me, the frantic beating of my own heart. We crawled until our muscles screamed in protest, until the air grew thin and a new, fresher scent reached us. Finally, we saw a dim light at the end of the tunnel. We pushed through a thicket of weeds and roots and emerged into the cool, damp night. We were in a dense forest, miles from Newfield. The air was clean and filled with the familiar, forgotten sounds of a living world. The chirping of crickets, the hoot of an owl, the rustle of leaves in the breeze. We were free. But the freedom was a hollow. We had been allowed to escape, a cold, surgical calculation. Over the next few weeks, we traveled by foot, living like ghosts. We stayed in the deepest parts of the woods, avoiding towns, roads, and other people. We saw the signs of the harvest everywhere. Abandoned vehicles, empty stores, the chilling, perfect silence that settled over everything. We came across other survivors, lone wanderers and small huddled groups, all with the same horrified, vacant look in their eyes. We never spoke to them. We didn't know if they were witnesses like us or if they were still prey. Our most chilling encounter came on a moonless night, 3 weeks after our escape. We were near the edge of a small, forgotten settlement called Hilltop, hiding in the tree line. We heard voices, not the panicked shouts of survivors, but a low, rhythmic chant. We crept closer, our bodies tense, and saw a group of a dozen people moving with a strange, deliberate purpose down the main road. They were dressed in tattered clothes, their faces gaunt and their eyes glassy. They held no weapons, no bags of supplies. They were simply walking in a perfect, single-file line, their hands clasped behind their backs. As they passed under a flickering streetlight, I saw a familiar sight. Their faces weren't blurred, but their movements were a mockery of a walk, a jerky, mechanical gait. They were humming a soft, low thrum, the same sound the creatures made. And their eyes were milky white, completely devoid of life. These were not the same things that had haunted Newfield. They were human. It's a signal. The broadcasts, they're not just warnings, they're a command. My words hung in the air, a final, horrifying piece of the puzzle. The military wasn't here to fight. The broadcasts weren't a lie. They were part of a larger system of control. The harvested people had been converted into something else, a new type of creature. But the rest of the world, those who were deemed useful, were being assimilated through a different method. They were being turned into a kind of living, obedient automaton, a human-form drone. The full scale of the horror was too big to comprehend. The creatures were just the foot soldiers. The true enemy was the silence on the news, the cold, robotic voice of the broadcast, the mind-bending hum. Davis and I made a decision. We couldn't keep running. We had to find out what was at the heart of the harvest. We needed to find a place with technology, a place where we could fight back, not with weapons, but with information. We began to move toward a distant signal we had been picking up on a scavenged radio, a faint, low-frequency hum that seemed to originate from the mountain range 100 miles to the north. It wasn't a broadcast. It was a constant, powerful signal, the source of the hum. We traveled for months, a long, grueling trek through forests and over mountains. We were no longer just survivors. We were hunters. We were ghosts with a purpose. We found a small, abandoned military listening post on a remote peak. It was old and mostly gutted, but the radio equipment was still intact, powered by a backup generator that ran on a series of monitors still faintly glowed. One displayed a massive, intricate diagram. It was a map, not of a town, but of a sprawling, interconnected network. Lines of light pulsed between cities and towns, and at the center of the network, a glowing red dot pulsed with a constant high-frequency hum. The mountain. "It's a hub," Davis whispered, his voice a mixture of awe and terror. "It's all connected. The towns, the cities, the people." We worked for hours using the post's equipment, listening to the signals. We found a small, fragmented file on a forgotten hard drive. The file was a recording, a garbled, terrified message from a scientist who had worked at the military base. The voice was a panicked whisper. "It's a quantum state bionetwork, not a disease. It assimilates, converts organic matter into a hive mind. The creatures, the infected, are just a way to seed the process, to spread the consciousness. The humming is the signal. It's a frequency that rewrites the human mind, makes them obedient. We're not fighting a virus. We're fighting a god. They're turning the world into one giant body." The recording cut out. The truth was worse than we had ever imagined. The harvest was a biological conversion, a slow, methodical assimilation of the entire planet. The creatures were the physical manifestation of this new consciousness, and the humming was its voice. I looked at Davis, and I saw the same terrible realization in his eyes. The creatures weren't the only ones in on the plan. We had just confirmed it. We had a choice. We could flee, live the rest of our lives as ghosts, or we could send a message, a real message, not a warning, but the truth. We worked for 2 more days, jury-rigging the radio to broadcast at the highest frequency possible. We wrote a short, concise message, a final testament to the world that was. We were not pleading for help. We were saying goodbye. We broadcast the signal, and for a glorious brief moment, the silence was broken. We saw the signal flare on a small red screen, reaching far out into the world. It was a single, perfect line of defiance against an impossible enemy, and then the screen went black. The radio died. We heard a new sound, not the hum of the creatures, but a low, metallic groan, a sound of something moving under the mountain. We ran. We didn't look back. We had to assume we were compromised. We had to assume that the signal had been intercepted. We had to assume that the god we had just found had noticed us. Months passed. We moved from the mountains to the foothills, living in the wilderness. We never stayed in one place. It was a sound that should have been impossible. It was the sound of a well-oiled machine, of a perfectly constructed clock. It was the sound of a creature's footsteps. It was coming for us. We were not saved. We were not worthy. We were witnesses. And the world had no use for us anymore. They found us. They're still here, and they're still watching.